Now we're going to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 22959 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out changes to this week's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
And I believe Patrick Harvey wishes to speak on the motion. Patrick Harvey is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Ordinarily, I would have been speaking to oppose and challenge the business motion. I do speak in objection to it, but with respect for the fact that it's more difficult to call a division in the current circumstances outside of decision time, I don't intend to press this to the vote. I do want to record, however, my objection to the lack of time being allocated to discuss the legislative consent motion on the trade bill. There are significant other changes to the business in this business motion which I support, not least the debate on COVID-related issues, which clearly needs time for scrutiny. But also in this week's business, we see that the internal market bill, which is so controversial, has been given a proper amount of debating time. That's as it should be. We all recognise that not every LCM requires a debate. Not every LCM raises serious policy or constitutional issues. The internal market bill does, and the government has agreed to allocate time to debate it. The same should be true of the trade bill. This is a bill which not only encompasses significant aspects of trade policy, but which also embodies the lack of scrutiny which the UK government intends to bring to trade policy. Their bill doesn't include the opportunity for this Parliament or others in civil society to comment and to debate trade matters and the operation of future trade agreements. We should not be replicating that lack of scrutiny by allocating just 5 minutes debating the legislative consent motion on the UK trade bill. As I say, Presiding Officer, I would normally press this to the vote. I won't do so today, merely out of respect for the practical implications of doing so before decision. But I would urge the Scottish Government, if they wish to distance themselves from the UK Government's free market policy, they need to allow proper time to debate these matters in future, not just cursorily nod them through with 5 minutes for an LCM and no debate on the wider trade policy context.
Thank you very much, Mr Harvey. And can I call on Graham Day, the Minister, to respond on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The business motion, as approved by the Bureau, has undergone much change from its original iteration, reflecting the circumstances we're in and the wishes of the parties of the Parliament. Patrick Harvey, as is his right, has sought a debate on the LCM on the trade bill of up to an hour on Thursday. There was time at our disposal on Thursday afternoon, but the view of the Bureau was that this should be deployed to debate any coronavirus measures which the Scottish Government might announce this week. Mr Harvey's view, therefore, was not supported. However, we have scheduled a small amount of time at the conclusion of the day for Mr Harvey to further air his concerns. Given that the Government will respond to that, and I'm speaking today particularly on behalf of the Bureau and to the business motion, I will end there, Presiding Officer, except to note this. The Scottish Government shares the concerns of others about the UK Government's trade policy and will continue to express those concerns and to press the UK Government to change tack. However, the trade bill, and specifically those elements on which we have been asked to consent, is largely a technical bill which seeks to secure current trade agreements. As such, it is narrow in scope. The provisions of the bill for which the legislative consent of the Scottish Parliament is required will enable full implementation of rolled-over trade agreements which Scotland benefited from through EU membership and will avoid potential gaps in Scotland's ability to access current and future procurement markets. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, Mr Harvey has noted his objections to the business motion but does not wish to press it to a vote. So the question is that motion 22959 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. Now we're going to move on. We're going to take topical questions after the budget statement. We'll move on now to the budget statement. Kate Forbes to speak on the delayed UK budget implications for Scottish budget, and the Cabinet Secretary will take questions after our statement, so any member who wishes to ask a question should press their request to speak button as soon as possible. And I call on Kate Forbes, the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today my counterparts in Wales and Northern Ireland and I are making a statement to our respective legislatures to set out our collective expectations of the UK Government for enhanced COVID support, fiscal flexibilities, proper involvement of the devolved governments in the UK spending reviews and a fair deal on replacement EU funding. We're doing this jointly, covering a wide range of financial matters to demonstrate the level of concern we all share across the different nations of the United Kingdom, across different parties and across different legislatures. The importance of these issues cannot be overstated because clarity, or lack thereof, directly links to our abilities to respond to COVID, to manage the nation's finances and to serve our communities and businesses. Our budget next year will be set in extremely challenging circumstances. Scotland's economic output fell by around a fifth in the second quarter of this year. Trading conditions remain extremely challenging for businesses as they adapt to operate in a COVID-safe manner, face restrained demand and ongoing cash flow problems. Wider indicators of the labour market signal that firms' headcounts have been falling and demand for staff has been subdued. We're taking every possible step to protect jobs as we work to rebuild our economy from the COVID crisis. But our economy remains fragile and recovery will be slow. Economic activity is not expected to return to pre-crisis levels before the end of 2023, and a failure to agree a trade deal with the EU would only further delay an already weak recovery. Currently, we have over 217,000 people still on furlough in Scotland, and our analysis suggested 61,000 jobs would be saved if the furlough scheme was extended by 8 months. The job support scheme, as I've previously said, is a poor and narrow substitute for the job retention scheme. Treasury's contribution has plummeted, with hard-pressed employers having to provide the majority of the support. In many sectors, that simply is not going to be possible. We're keen to work with the UK Government to ensure that any extended or replacement scheme meets the needs of Scottish businesses and workers, but is also flexible enough to respond to the public health measures that are required to control the virus. This is particularly critical to support businesses and workers where local lockdown restrictions are necessary. There is no flexibility to support local or national restrictions or those sectors like the events sector that have not yet been able to reopen. Businesses in sectors like tourism, arts and recreation have limited opportunity to benefit from the job support scheme and are likely to cut jobs. And so today, we, the Welsh Finance Secretary and the Northern Irish Finance Minister, are collectively asking the UK Government to do more to support businesses that are hardest hit, more on skills and job creation for young people, and also to continue with additional universal credits, which are due to run out in March, which have helped some of the poorest families weather the storm. Presiding Officer, we have collectively welcomed the £6.5 billion in consequentials for COVID-related spending from the UK Government that we received, and we have made good use of that money. Our package of economic interventions is worth £3.3 billion, and key measures include £972 million for a package of rates relief, £1.2 billion in business support grants, £144 million in hardship and resilience funds, £372 million of support for transport, £230 million in terms of an economic recovery stimulus package to invest in capital projects, and £160 million for a rural recovery package. We've also spent an additional £2.4 billion directly on health. While we've yet to formally allocate approximately £500 million of consequentials, which will be done in the spring budget revision, that funding needs that we currently face, the funding needs that we currently face far outstrip the resources available, and every penny has been allocated against health, transport and economic support measures required by the COVID response. If the Scottish Government had the powers to borrow, or at least the very limited fiscal flexibilities which the Government and the Parliament have asked for in Wales, Northern Ireland and here, this would be a very different statement. But without further clarity on funding or flexibilities from the UK Government, substantial savings will be required to bring the budget into balance by year end. And so today, we are also collectively asking the UK Government to provide the full suite of flexibilities that we have collectively asked for. These are flexibilities that we need to manage the unprecedented ongoing uncertainty that we're facing. The powers that we and other devolved governments are seeking are reasonable, they're straightforward, and they wouldn't cost the UK Government a penny. And that, Presiding Officer, brings me on to the main focus, which is this year's or next year's budget. Because the delay of the UK budget means that the Scottish budget for next year will be based on provisional and partial figures and therefore subject to unnecessary uncertainty and risk at a time where uncertainty and risk are not in short supply. We will not know what parameters we have to work with on crucial issues such as health funding or business support. The degree of uncertainty runs to the billions of pounds. We faced a similar situation last year, which was deeply problematic for our budget setting and scrutiny processes. The situation we now face is further compounded by the financial challenges of COVID-19 and uncertainty surrounding Brexit and the threat of a potential no-deal or poor deal outcome. We expect that the scale of the potential changes in the UK budget, including those related to taxation, will be far larger due to COVID. If our budget goes first, there will be a need to respond to tax changes in the UK budget, tax changes that might only be possible in Scotland if UK changes generate consequential funding. For income tax and non-domestic rates poundage, that is especially challenging because we cannot change these during the financial year. Our budget process is at the mercy of decisions, or rather indecision right now, in Westminster. Full financial powers are required to ensure that we can plan independently from the UK's fiscal policy dysfunction. So today, we, that is again the Welsh Finance Secretary, the Northern Irish Finance Secretary and myself, are collectively asking the UK Government for urgent clarity around the timing and the scope of the comprehensive spending review to allow us to improve our planning assumptions. Presiding Officer, the last matter I wanted to touch on is the Internal Markets Bill, which of course represents an assault on devolution, the likes of which we have never experienced since the Scottish Parliament was established. The UK Government has written provisions into this bill that presume Whitehall control over the delivery of replacements for the EU funding programmes in Scotland, programmes that we have successfully delivered for decades. The end of the transition period on the 31st of December 2020 signals the end of funding allocations for certain EU programmes, with no agreed replacements in place from the UK Government. Communities across Scotland have benefited significantly from European structural funds, with the current programme worth over £780 million. Despite being less than 3 months away from the end of the EU structural fund programmes in the UK, shamefully little detail about their replacement has been released by the UK Government. We require full engagement in the development of the replacement funding vehicle, and Scotland's share of the funding must be fully devolved so that we can target it in a manner that meets the needs of Scotland's people, communities and businesses. And in light of the UK Government's continuing intransigence on that point, today we're collectively asking for assurances that the UK Government will provide full replacement funding of EU programmes without detriment to the devolution settlements. And so, Presiding Officer, as I draw to a close, I'm sure every member in this Parliament knows how critical the next Scottish budget will be. It will be one of the most important in the history of devolution. It will determine how our economy and our public services respond to and recover from COVID-19. And of course, in the ongoing grip of this global pandemic, it will be a budget of unprecedented uncertainty. And in that context, we need as much certainty as possible. We need as much engagement as possible and as much collaboration as possible. We need assurance on what the figures will be so that we can plan our budget and respond to the multiple crises that we currently face. The UK Government, as the holder of the key financial and economic powers that will shape the size of that budget, have a responsibility to help reduce uncertainty and not compound it. Regrettably, action to date has increased that uncertainty, but there is still time to make amends. And that is why today the finance ministers of the devolved governments, representing their 3 nations, are speaking with one voice in calling for the UK Government to provide that clarity, to provide that certainty, and to provide that flexibility that we require in order to serve the people, the businesses of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Ms Forbes will now take questions. Murdo Fraser to be followed by Jackie Bailey. Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Although businesses and workers across Scotland will be dismayed that our first thought in this economic crisis is to call for more constitutional upheaval, when the government should be getting on with the job of using its extensive resources to support those in need. Presiding Officer, the current fiscal framework, which the Cabinet Secretary criticises, was of course negotiated and agreed by her colleague, the Deputy First Minister, in 2016. And what was missing from her statement was a recognition of the substantial value that that fiscal framework has to the Scottish budget, in that it protects spending levels in Scotland in the event of a decline in tax revenues, providing that decline is in line with the UK average. And given what's coming down the horizon, I would have thought the Cabinet Secretary would have wanted to recognise the very important protection that that fiscal framework provides. Instead, what she says is that full financial powers are required. So can I ask her, what is her analysis of the cost of that to the Scottish budget? Her own government's GERS figures put the gap between income and expenditure in Scotland at £15 billion. Isn't that a budget deficit at a scale the last thing that Scotland needs at this very difficult time?
Cabinet Secretary.
Considering the UK Government's deficit is currently forecast to be in the region of £372 billion, I would question the merit of that question. In terms of the calls that we are making today, when it comes to setting a budget, although the additional flexibilities that we received through the fiscal framework have helped in part in respond to this pandemic, what I'm asking for is actually very, very simple. I am asking for clarity on our budget position, clarity on the block grant adjustments, clarity on what the forecasts will be in order to allow us to set a budget for next year. Murdo Fraser will know that even in terms of 3 taxes, income tax needs to be set before the next financial year. Non-domestic rates changes are contingent on consequential funding from equivalent tax changes made by the UK Government. And local authorities are required to set their council tax before the 11th of March. On those 3 points, we need urgent clarity so that we can set our budget and provide that equivalent clarity to businesses and to communities. That's as simple as it is. Now, that clarity could be provided, and if it's not going to be provided, which is my fear in light of the UK Government scrapping its autumn budget, I am asking for the equivalent fiscal flexibilities to plan independently. This is not about the Constitution. This is about families and households and taxpayers and those that rely on our public services having the clarity that I want to give them, if it is given in the first place, to the Scottish Government.
Thank you. And Jackie Bailey to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
I share the Scottish Government's concern about the impact of delays to the UK budget process, but believe we should nevertheless afford this Parliament as much scrutiny as possible. Last week I asked the Cabinet Secretary about the £537 million of money to deal with COVID that was remaining unallocated. She indicated the money had been allocated. Will she publish a list of what specific initiatives it has been earmarked for? The Cabinet Secretary talked about flexibilities from Treasury, and she has our broad support for her request. It is, however, in her gift to provide flexibility for councils, allowing them to balance their budgets over time rather than in year to cope with the extra cost of COVID. Will the Cabinet Secretary give councils the flexibility that she seeks herself from the UK Government?
I will happily provide a very detailed list of spend and costs associated as part of our spring budget revision, which, as Jackie Bailey knows, is the normal point at which these things are confirmed. Can I clarify once again that the costs, the need, far outstrips the funding that has been made available. For example, I require currently at least £200 million to meet increased transport needs. We know that the costs that local government have identified need to be met. There are existing commitments when it comes to the self-isolating payments, which are not in the autumn budget revision and will be in the spring budget revision. So there's an element of uncertainty, and there may well be future UK government announcements that will generate consequentials, which will form part of the spring budget revision. In terms of the fiscal flexibilities, the short answer answer is in part yes. We are working on a package with local authorities, which I hope we can jointly announce in the next few days, ideally, on fiscal flexibilities for local authorities so that they can free up their spending power and ensure that they can respond to the pandemic.
Patrick Harvey to be followed by Willie Rennie. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Both the Scottish Government and the Fiscal Commission need to produce tax revenue forecasts in respect of devolved taxes. If the Scottish budget has to be taken forward in advance of knowing what UK tax policy is going to be, what will those forecasts be projected against? Will it be the status quo of UK tax policy or some other scenario based on the expectations of what the UK government might do?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think that's probably a more appropriate question to ask the Scottish Fiscal Commission, who, of course, are the independent forecasters, unless I've misunderstood his question. But when it comes to our budget position, we will have to set our budget. It depends on how up-to-date and accurate the block grant adjustments are that are published in November. So if he recalls last year, there were figures published in December that were based essentially on the spring OBR update. So it was over 6 months out of date. What I'm pressing for right now is to ask Treasury to ensure that the figures that they publish for the block grant adjustments are as accurate as possible, and that means that we can plan more clearly on that basis. But we also have to make sure that the SFC has sufficient time to develop their own robust forecasts, and of course that's why we have the 10-week notification period. There is a degree of flexibility, but the integrity of the forecast will be a critical aspect of the budget. In terms of tax, we will, I'm assuming, have to set some of our tax policies, at least in advance of knowing what the UK government's tax policies are going to be. And the relative performance of our tax is critical in terms of the overall spending envelope that we have. For things like land and buildings transaction tax, we will presumably have to react to what the UK government does through SDLT when they set their own budget in terms of non-domestic rates. We cannot avoid the reverse cliff edge for the 100% of relief that has been provided to retail, hospitality and leisure without corresponding UK government policy or significant Barnett consequentials. So I suppose the answer to my question is we will plan with as much evidence as we have, which currently, right now, is very little.
Thank you. Willie Rennie to be followed by Ruth Maguire, both of whom join us remotely. Willie Rennie.
The Finance Secretary not unreasonably complains about the uncertainty caused by the UK government, which in turn is in part caused by the uncertainty with the pandemic. I want to know what the Finance Secretary is going to do about this. What discussions are there with the UK government to get that greater certainty? What behind the scenes is she hearing about when that certainty will come? And I have to say, she's stretching the point by saying that none of this is about the Constitution. With the SNP, it always is about the Constitution. But I'd be interested to understand exactly what she's hearing from the UK government so that we can all have a bit more certainty.
Cabinet Secretary.
Considering I am making a very similar statement to my Welsh counterpart and Northern Irish counterpart, you might want to ask them if it's also about the Constitution, because my view right now is that this is very much not even just about the Scottish Government. It's about ensuring that our taxpayers, our public services, local government can have sufficient clarity, early clarity. In terms of what I'm doing about it, there's probably 2 points. One is obviously in discussion with Treasury counterparts at an official level and a ministerial level. I had a discussion with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury immediately after the Chancellor's winter economic update, and the three finance ministers have also pressed for an early meeting with the Chancellor to confirm the concerns that we have around the lack of clarity. The second thing is to try and get some confirmation of what flexibilities might be provided to us, and I'm not talking about fiscal flexibilities. Last year there was, for example, an option as to whether we used provisional block grant adjustments or use the updated block grant adjustments, which are only confirmed at the UK budget. And the Treasury agreed that we could have a choice between provisional or confirmed. Now, there was over £200 million of difference between them. So these things matter. You know, this is not just about boring budgets. This is about the kind of provisions we can put in place to support households, support communities, and to support our public services. So those are the two things that I'm actively involved with and will continue to push in order to get that clarity we need to set a budget.
Thank you. Ruth Maguire to be followed by Maurice Golden. Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When the UK Government decided to delay its budget to March 11th earlier this year, the public spending watchdog for local government, the Accounts Commission, described the decision as really problematic and kind of unprecedented. Our local authorities are big employers in our communities and at the forefront of delivering important services to our citizens. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the UK Government scrapping its latest budget date is similarly problematic and creates untold problems, not just for the Scottish Government, but for local government funding and flexibility?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that final point is critical, because last year there was a lot of debate, for example, with local authorities having to set their budgets, not knowing what their own spending envelope was or what the local government finance settlement would be. And some of them had those debates in advance of hearing what their finance settlement was, and then had to make updates. And of course, they have got to set council tax in advance of the 11th of March. So in terms of the considerations that I'm grappling with just now, it's how we give as much clarity and certainty to local government and to others, whilst at the same time making sure that we have as much robust information and evidence as possible on which to set our own budget.
Thank you. Maurice Golden to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The SNP's £500 million growth scheme delivered half the promised funding. When will businesses receive the missing millions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, considering that I've just confirmed that we have invested £2.3 billion in our business support packages, ranging from grants all the way through to non-domestic rates relief, the government is right now on being as flexible as possible to ensure that every penny we have at our disposal goes out the door to support businesses or to keep the health service delivering for the people that rely on it. And we'll continue to do that. Of course, when it comes to budgets, we had to be flexible with some budgets, as the autumn budget revision and indeed the summer budget revision demonstrated.
Gibson to be followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise the Chamber whether it is any indication from the UK Government if another round of austerity is heading our way, given that the Chancellor's comments that we cannot continue to borrow our way out of a hole? And what impact would further austerity have on Scotland's employment and economy, bearing in mind that the UK economy, according to last week's Economist, has shrunk further this year than that of any other in the developed world?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think I overheard the Chancellor also saying that austerity was absolutely the right thing to do, which may be news to those who have suffered at the hands of Tory austerity for the last decade. In terms of the budget, and the Scottish Government, of course, has not been consulted on it, and we found out about the decision at the same time as everybody else through media reporting. We have been very clear. We've set out over the last few months that we expect that the UK Government to continue to respond to the pandemic and to ensure that they support people that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. Now is not the time to be focusing on getting the public finances back into shape. Now is the time to ensure that we support people to, as far as we can, get through these very difficult months.
Thank you. Neil Bibby, followed by John Mason. Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. COVID has hit some communities harder than others. The West of Scotland has recorded some of Scotland's highest COVID death rates. 2 of our local authority areas have the highest unemployment rates in Scotland. Much of the region has been subject to additional restrictions, and there's a growing number of positive cases. To date, no additional resources have been targeted towards the West in any meaningful way. I'm sure the Finance Secretary would agree with the principle that the hardest hit areas of Scotland should receive extra support. Will therefore extra resources go to the hardest hit places to help them recover and rebuild when the Scottish Government brings forward their next budget?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in terms of the sentiment of the question, I do agree in part with that sentiment The difficulty is, and I say this as carefully as possible, when it comes to distributing local government funding, we have been very clear with COSLA that if there's an alternative funding mechanism that they think this money should be distributed through, in other words, for example, places that have been hardest hit, then I'm very open to looking at how we distribute the funding that is available to those areas. Now, in the next few days, I hope to be in a position to jointly announce with COSLA significant further support, including the fiscal flexibilities that Jackie Bailey talked about, as well as support through the Lost Income Scheme. Now, that Lost Income Scheme will directly reflect the challenges that councils are facing through that lost income, and it will be an application-based support. So, you know, in terms of using the formula, if there's a better way of doing it to ensure that the hardest hit areas get more, then I'm very open to considering it.
John Mason, to be followed by Bill Bowman. John Mason.
Thank you. I have to say I find it puzzling that the UK government is postponing the budget because they feel it's a major decision because we're in a time of crisis with COVID. But at the same time, they're not postponing the decision on Brexit for exactly the same reasons. Can the Cabinet Secretary help me understand that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm afraid I can't oblige in answering that question. I don't understand it, and I think the decision has been taken with no thought to the fact that other organisations and governments are dependent on the clarity provided by the UK government's budget in order to respond to their own challenges and to the crises that exist in our respective countries.
Bill Bowman, to be followed by Tom Arthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and here's a question the Cabinet Secretary can answer. If, as she has said, every penny of the £6.5 billion extra Barnett consequentials has already been allocated, and given her wish for clarity, why do we have to wait until the spring revision in February to find out exactly where she has secreted these extra consequentials?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think it's remarkable that the opposition are expecting us to have spent every penny at our disposal by this point in October, fully understanding that the challenges of responding to the crisis will continue. Now, in terms of explanation, I was very grateful when the UK government confirmed that they would provide a guaranteed amount of funding. This is what they announced in July. I welcomed it. It was a different way of providing Barnett consequentials. But it meant that they provided a fund which they then said would continue to cover all future announcements of consequentials. So the challenge for us just now is that that funding may well be required to cover additional announcements that are being made over the next few months. And the UK government needs to provide a very clear reconciliation of what is covered by the fund they've already provided. Because failing that, that means that all that funding has got to cover every new spending request between now and the beginning of the next financial year. That includes transport, local government, shielding support, self-isolating payments, localised lockdowns. We know that every penny at our disposal is already committed to meeting these challenges. And I know that the challenges and the needs far outstrip the funding we have available.
Tom Arthur, to be followed by Alec Rowley.
Would the Cabinet Secretary agree that the Chancellor's decision not to proceed with a budget at this time suggests, to borrow someone else's words, that the UK Government is focused on England and is treating Scotland and the other devolved nations as an afterthought?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I've never agreed so wholeheartedly with Douglas Ross as when I heard those comments. And I think certainly the budget scenario proves his point and would have been a very fitting example for him to use. And again, the point of today's statement is to illustrate this is not an SNP point, this is not a Scottish Government point, this is not even a Scottish Parliament point to be made. This is a concern that is shared by our counterparts in Wales and in Northern Ireland as well. And that lack of engagement, I think, demonstrates a complete lack of interest in Scotland and the other devolved governments.
Alec Rowley, to be followed by Joe McAlpine.
Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the fact that the Scottish Government is working with the administrations in Wales and Northern Ireland, and we need to continue to do so. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it is absolute madness to be continuing with a bad Brexit deal at this time? And is there still mileage in trying to push the Tories to stop this this constitutional upheaval that they are driving across the United Kingdom. And on structure funds, has the government put forward any proposals for the replacement of structure funds being administered in Scotland and spent in Scotland?
So I do think it's bizarre that the UK government doesn't seem capable of setting a budget which gives us a one-year outlook, but seems dead set on continuing with Brexit, which will have an impact for decades. In terms of the proposals, we have set out quite clearly the red lines that we expect to be met when it comes to replacement funding, and that includes the fact that there should be no detriment to the funding that is available, and the fact that it should be devolved so that decisions can be made in Scotland to ensure that we continue to deliver for the communities, the initiatives, the projects that rely on EU funding.
And Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much. All over the country, MSPs are hearing from businesses, particularly in the hospitality, leisure and creative sectors, who are struggling. What effect does this delayed UK budget have on the Scottish Government's ability to assist them over the coming months, and particularly if they are affected by the announcement the First Minister will make tomorrow?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I think this is one of the most critical questions, because when it comes to responding to the crisis, to responding to business need, to mitigating some of the effects of the pandemic on business, what we have asked for is for the flexibility to tailor our support to Scottish businesses, particularly those that have been hardest hit in hospitality, leisure and creative sectors. We have passed on more in funding than the consequentials we got from business support. I want that funding to go as far as possible. But in the absence of confirmed consequential figures in the UK budget, or without fiscal flexibilities, then our hands are tied behind our backs when it comes to responding.
Thank you very much to Cabinet Secretary and members. That concludes our statement on the delayed UK budget implications for Scottish budget.